there is a truth very few people notice when they look at Libra. On the surface, you are always the one keeping the rhythm, keeping the peace, making sure the room does not feel too tense, the conversation does not grow too heavy, the emotions of others do not spill over. But inside, there have been years when you quietly pulled yourself away from yourself, little by little, like a dimmer slowly turning down the light, just so no one else would feel blinded. And 2025 has been one of those years. A year when Libra learned to smile first, think later, step back before anyone else had to ask, and only question yourself at the very end. You did not do this because you were weak. You did it because you believed balance was something sacred, because you believed that if you endured just a little more, things would smooth themselves out. That if you stayed silent one more time, a relationship could be saved. That if you understood others just a bit better, the world would feel less sharp, less divided. But there have likely been very private moments, very honest ones, when you sat alone and could no longer recognize your own inner voice. Not because you did not have one, but because you had grown used to placing it beneath everything else. You learned to think of others so quickly that your own feelings barely had time to surface before being pushed aside again. You became tired, not because you were doing too much, but because you were carrying emotions that were never yours to hold. And it all accumulated quietly, like a scale that had been tipped for a long time, while you kept pretending it was still balanced. If 2025 has made you feel like you are no longer yourself, if there have been mornings when you woke up feeling as though you were living a familiar role that no longer belonged to you, then pause for just a moment. Not to blame yourself, not to fix anything, just to look honestly. Because that feeling is not a sign of collapse. It is a very subtle message that you have reached the limit of how much you can give without betraying yourself. It is a signal that your awareness is changing, that your soul is no longer willing to trade inner fairness for outer peace. Some souls are not born to fight, and they are not born to endure forever either. Libra was born to remind the world of justice, of balance, of harmony. But balance was never meant to require your disappearance. When you lose yourself to keep everything calm, that calm only lasts for a moment, while the quiet wounds inside you stay much longer. 2025 has placed you before a truth that is gentle, yet impossible to avoid. If you continue living the same way, you will drift farther and farther from yourself. And if you allow yourself to stop, even in silence, another door begins to open quietly. The Libra soul does not end here. It is drawing inward, like the light just before dawn, not to fade, but to prepare to shine in a different way. The fairness you have always offered to others is beginning to return to its rightful place. Not loudly, not with judgment, just with a clear inner knowing that you cannot continue living while leaving yourself behind. And when you realize this, you do not need to do anything yet. Simply allow yourself to stay with this feeling a little longer. Let it guide you. Let it whisper to you. There is another way of living waiting for you. Lighter, more honest, and far more fair to your own heart. When you stop rushing to push that feeling away, you begin to notice something quietly unexpected. It is not that the world is asking more of you. It is that you have grown used to asking too much of yourself. You have learned to stand tall even when everything inside you was trembling. You have learned to say you are fine even when your heart was already tired. You have learned to smooth out everything around you without ever asking what you needed on the inside. And by the end of 2025, that familiarity no longer feels safe. It leaves behind a very still, very deep space where, for the first time in a long while, you begin to hear yourself more clearly than ever. You may start to realize that you have tried so hard. But much of that effort was not about living better. It was about not disappointing anyone. You tried to keep your promises. You tried to keep your role. You tried to keep the image of someone easy to be around, someone reasonable, someone who always understands. And in that constant effort, something essential was forgotten for far too long. the right to put things down, the right to not be okay without having to explain yourself, the right to be quiet without feeling guilty, the right to pull your energy back from places that only take and never truly hold you. The end of 2025 brings a change that is almost invisible. It does not arrive as a dramatic collision. It feels more like a slow breeze, just strong enough to show you that you no longer want to brace yourself. You no longer want to perform strength. You no longer want to organize other people's emotions before you even get a chance to feel your own. And in that moment, a very simple sentence begins to rise inside you. Not loudly, not urgently, just quietly and unmistakably clear. I have value even when I am not holding myself together. That sentence does not ask you to believe it right away. It only asks that you listen to it long enough for it to sink into the parts of you that are exhausted from proving too much. You may notice that you no longer feel the need to explain yourself. Not because you have become cold, but because you understand now that not everyone needs to understand you. You may also stop trying to keep the peace at any cost, because you can feel, deep down, that peace built on your constant sacrifice will eventually collapse. Some relationships do not need more words. They only need a little more distance to become clear. Some emotions do not need to be fixed. They only need rest to soften on their own. And the strangest part of all is this. When you stop trying so hard, nothing falls apart the way you feared it would. Instead, a new space opens very slowly, very quietly. A space where you can breathe without monitoring yourself. A space where your heart can finally lie down without worrying about being judged. This is not giving up. It is another form of courage. The courage to do nothing, to let your emotions recover, to allow your soul to return to its rightful place. And in that rest, something important is happening beneath the surface. Destiny does not open through effort. It opens through permission. Permission to be tired. Permission to be real. Permission to step out of an old role so that another way of living can finally appear. As natural as breathing, and gentle enough for you to realize that you were never wrong. You only forgot, for a while, how to treat yourself with the fairness you have always given to everyone else. And then, when you finally allow yourself to stop, when you allow yourself to stop holding everything together, another layer of emotion begins to rise. It is not loud. It is not intense. It is slow, familiar, like a long-held sigh that was never released. These are the sentences you have been repeating to yourself for a long time. I should have spoken up. I should have left sooner. I wish I had been stronger. But those sentences do not come from truth. They come from a habit of self-blame that quietly shaped the way you look back at your past. You became used to judging yourself under a harsh light. You learned to see silence as failure. You learned to treat endurance as proof that you were not brave enough. Yet there is something very important Libra often forgets when looking back. You were in situations where the choices were never simple. You were standing between tangled relationships, between responsibility and emotion, between keeping the peace and keeping yourself. Speaking up was not always safe. Leaving was not always something you could do right away. And strength did not always look like resistance. Sometimes, strength meant staying alive inside a difficult situation. It meant holding on to kindness when you were already exhausted. It meant protecting your heart from turning bitter, even after it had been hurt many times. If you look back slowly enough, you will see that you were never standing still. You learned how to observe more deeply. You learned how to sense your own limits more clearly. You learned how to be quiet, not out of fear, but because you were gathering enough understanding to avoid repeating the same lesson again. The things you did not say, the choices you did not make, the paths you were not yet ready to take, were not signs of weakness. They were signs that you were in a moment of transformation, a moment where the soul needs time to change its shape before entering a new cycle. There is a very particular moment, often arriving on quiet evenings, when you suddenly realize that you did everything you could with the version of yourself you were back then. Not perfectly, not completely, but with everything you had at that time. When the sentence forms inside you, "I did the best I could then," you feel a layer of pressure lift from your chest. Not because the past is fixed, but because you stop fighting it. You begin to understand that blaming yourself does not make you stronger. It only keeps you trapped inside a loop that has already served its purpose. And when that acknowledgement appears, even softly, even for just a moment, the energy begins to shift. Memories that once felt heavy no longer pull you down the way they used to. They become experience, not a verdict. An old cycle does not need a dramatic ending. It closes the moment you stop judging your past self through the eyes of who you are today. In that softening, you can feel a new space beginning to open. Not the space of loss, but the space of possibility. A space where another version of Libra, wiser, more grounded, and more fair to themselves, is quietly taking shape, ready to move forward, without carrying the weight of what has already been lived. When you stop blaming yourself for what you could not do differently, a very quiet awakening begins to unfold. It is not loud like a decision to walk away. It is not dramatic like a sudden turning point. It feels more like the moment you realize you have been carrying too many things that no longer belong to you. You look back on the days that have passed, and one truth becomes clear. It was never that you did not try hard enough. It was that you spent too much energy holding together things that had been out of balance for a very long time. Relationships where you were always the one to bend first. Roles that required you to shrink your own desires to fit the expectations of others. Obligations labeled as responsibility, but quietly draining your joy little by little. Libra has always been good at taking action for the sake of others. You know how to keep things running smoothly. You know when to step forward and when to step back to keep the peace. But 2025 showed you the other side of that flexibility. When action no longer comes from the movement of the heart, but from the fear of disappointing someone, it becomes a burden. You still show up. You still get things done. You are still seen as considerate, reliable, reasonable. Yet inside, you feel increasingly empty. There are evenings when you sit quietly and wonder why you feel so exhausted even though nothing dramatic has happened. The answer is simple. You have been doing too much for things that no longer nourish you. And then, as the year begins to close, a very different feeling appears. Not the urge to do more, but the desire to do less. Not laziness, but discernment. You begin to notice appointments that weigh on you before they even happen. Promises that feel like a trade for your inner peace. Roles you continue to hold only because they are familiar, not because you still want to be there. Your heart no longer stirs when you think of them. All that remains is a sense of duty and fatigue. And the moment you recognize that absence of feeling, it becomes a gift. Because Libra lives in alignment only when moving within harmony. When your heart no longer responds, it is not a sign that you have become numb. It is a sign that you have drifted too far from your center of balance. The end of 2025 does not ask you to change everything at once. It simply invites you to look closely at one question. What in your life is taking more energy than it is giving back? And do you have the courage to pause it, even just a little? Stopping does not mean quitting. For Libra, stopping at the right moment is a refined act of wisdom. It is choosing not to enter a familiar conversation that always leaves a heavy aftertaste. It is allowing yourself to decline another responsibility, taken only to be seen or approved. It is stepping back from relationships where you are the only one still trying. When you do this, you may feel empty for a brief moment. But soon after, a lighter feeling arrives, like setting down a bag you have carried for so long without realizing how heavy it had become. In the space created by doing less, something quietly miraculous happens. You gain room to breathe. You gain time to listen to desires that are small, yet deeply true. You gain clarity about what truly matters in the road ahead. Libra does not need to run faster to change their life. You only need to stop running in directions that no longer belong to you. And when you create enough space, life finds its own way to fill it. with opportunities that fit better, with relationships that feel fairer, with choices that remind you are living, not just completing tasks. In this reduction, you realize you have lost nothing of value. Instead, you are preparing for a different kind of leap. Not through pressure, but through awareness. A leap born from knowing what you no longer wish to carry, so your heart can grow lighter. So the path ahead can open naturally, quiet enough, deep enough, and true enough for you to keep moving forward without having to hold yourself together the way you once did. And when the pace of life finally slows, when your actions are no longer pushed forward by habit or obligation, you begin to notice something very different. Silence appears, not as an empty or frightening space, but like a familiar room you have not entered in a long time. In that room, there is no noise of expectation, no eyes waiting for you to be cheerful, to be okay, to shine on cue. There is only you, whole, sitting with yourself, without needing to explain anything. The end of 2025 does not arrive to demand celebration. It arrives as a very gentle permission. You do not have to look happy to prove that you are living well. Perhaps for the first time in a long while, you notice that you no longer want to attend gatherings just to keep the atmosphere pleasant. You no longer want to smile on time when something inside you needs rest. Not because you have become distant, but because you are becoming honest with your inner state. Real joy does not come from noise. It comes from the feeling of being yourself without being pulled out of your natural breath. You begin to understand that there are evenings spent alone that offer a fullness no celebration can replace. A warm cup of tea, a familiar song, a stretch of quiet long enough to hear your own heart clearly. Small things, yet they touch the deepest part of you. In that stillness, memories begin to return gently. Not the loud moments, but the subtle ones you once passed over because you were too busy. A look that once warmed your heart. A sentence that made you feel understood. An ordinary moment that somehow stayed with you for years. You realize your heart never stopped responding. It simply needed space to be heard again. And when you allow yourself to remember these things, not with regret, but with recognition, you begin to reconnect with the most delicate part of yourself. Then comes a moment that matters deeply. Often while standing in front of a mirror, or while looking back on the year without the urge to edit it anymore. You see clearly what you endured, what you carried, what you did not give up on, even when you were exhausted. And this time, instead of asking why you did not do better, a different sentence rises. I made it this far. No fireworks, no applause, no witness required. Just saying it to yourself is enough for a deep recognition to spread, like warmth slowly filling your chest. The end of the year is no longer about who is beside you, who texts you, who counts down the seconds with you. It becomes a quieter question. What are you carrying as you close this year? Peace or pressure? Relief or regret? Fullness or depletion? Libra understands better than most that true balance is not found in the number of people around you, but in your inner state. When you end the year with a heart that no longer needs to prove anything, you give yourself a rare and powerful gift. And in that feeling, not forced joy, not suppressed sadness, just honesty, you begin to sense a very delicate rearrangement taking place. What is unnecessary is set aside. Emotions settle into their rightful places. You do not need to name this shift. You only need to stay with it long enough to feel yourself standing steadier, quieter, and more prepared for what is ahead. Not with loud excitement, but with a calm trust that when you step into a new year carrying emotions that are true to you, everything ahead will naturally find its order. As gently as the way you just allowed yourself to be still. And when you close the year with a heart that no longer needs to prove anything, you begin to notice the clearest change taking place within the connections around you. Not loudly, not with announcements. Just that ties which once felt tight begin to loosen. Someone who used to be present every day suddenly grows quiet. Conversations that once lasted for hours become shorter, or stop altogether. Meetings you once worked hard to arrange now feel exhausting just to think about. At first, this can feel confusing, even a little painful, because Libra is used to holding people together, holding relationships in place, holding things so they do not fall apart. But the deeper you listen, the more you sense a very gentle truth within that loosening. It is not love that is disappearing. It is forms of connection that were no longer fair quietly stepping away. You have been in relationships where harmony was built on your silence. You gave up words. You gave up feelings. You gave up boundaries, just so no one else would be hurt. You became the one who understood first, forgave first, let things go first. Over time, that role became expected. People grew used to you being okay, being patient, asking for nothing. But by the end of 2025, your soul no longer wants to maintain that kind of balance. Because any relationship that requires you to keep shrinking just to stay peaceful will eventually pull you away from yourself. As this shift unfolds, you may notice you no longer want to explain as much. You no longer want to pull conversations back on track. You no longer want to repair what keeps falling out of rhythm. Not because you stopped caring, but because you care enough about yourself now to understand that not every relationship needs to be saved through your sacrifice. Some people do not leave because they are wrong. They leave because you have outgrown the role you once played in their life. And that truth does not need proof. It does not need justification. It only needs acceptance. You may find yourself becoming selective naturally. You feel lighter around those who allow you to speak honestly without fear of upsetting them. You feel calmer when you do not have to manage the mood of the room. You feel like yourself without adjusting your tone, your emotions, or your thoughts to fit someone else. Connections like these do not require many promises. They do not need constant presence. Simply being there is enough. And slowly, you begin to see that the relationships that drained you were not exhausting because they were complex, but because they had lacked fairness for a very long time. During this phase, there is a familiar fear for Libra, the fear of being alone. But this aloneness does not feel like the loneliness of before. It does not carry emptiness. It carries clarity. You are no longer pulled by the emotions of others. You hear your own breath more clearly, your own needs, your own boundaries that you once overlooked. This quiet is not a punishment. It is a necessary preparation. A place where you learn how to stand steadily without leaning on outside approval. And within that stillness, something important is being arranged. The universe is not taking away what truly belongs to you. It is gently clearing space by removing what no longer fits. So new connections can enter. Connections where you do not have to give so much, explain so much, sacrifice so much just to remain. Fair relationships do not arrive through holding on tighter. They arrive when you are brave enough to release what makes you feel smaller. You do not need to cut ties. You do not need to make declarations. Just listen to how your heart feels around each person. Where you feel light, cherish it. Where you feel heavy, allow yourself to step back. This is not selfishness. It is the maturity of a soul that understands true peace cannot be built on one-sided endurance. And when you stop playing the one who always yields, you do not lose love. You learn how to meet it again, in a form that is truer, gentler, and fair enough that you no longer have to trade yourself just to stay. And when the connections around you begin to quiet down, when you no longer have to tense yourself to keep time for someone else, your body and your inner world start to speak more clearly, not through loud warnings, but through a fatigue that feels deeply real, deeply human. Libra often does not realize how exhausted they are until they have gone too far, because you are used to prioritizing outer harmony over inner balance. But by the end of 2025, you can no longer ignore these signals. They arrive as a gentle, steady reminder that your destiny is not shaped by how hard you push yourself, but by how well you care for yourself. You may notice that your sleep is no longer as deep as it once was. You lie there with your eyes closed, yet your mind keeps moving, thinking, processing everything that has already passed. Not because you are weak, but because you have been carrying too many emotions that were never fully set down. When you begin to allow yourself to go to bed a little earlier, to turn off the unnecessary thoughts, and quietly tell yourself that today was enough, your body responds almost immediately. That is how Libra works. When treated with gentleness, you recover more powerfully than most. You also start to notice very small things. A brief chill can suddenly make you feel heavier. A rushed meal can leave behind a lingering emptiness. Your body is not asking for perfection. It is only asking to be heard. When you keep yourself warm, not just with clothing but with care, when you choose food that truly nourishes you instead of simply filling you, you send an important message inward, that you are worthy of care, not because you performed well, but because you are alive. Libra is directly affected by their emotional state. This has always been true. But by the end of 2025, it becomes clearer than ever. When your inner world is tense, everything around you feels heavier. When your inner world softens, situations that once felt blocked begin to shift, quietly. It is no coincidence that clearer decisions emerge when you rest enough. It is no accident that your emotions settle when you treat your body kindly. This is not superstition. It is a very human truth. When the inside becomes stable, the outside naturally adjusts. Rest, for Libra, is never avoidance. It is a refined form of preparation. You are not withdrawing from life. You are returning to your rightful place within it. You allow your body to recover. You allow your mind to become still. So that when you move forward, you do not carry old exhaustion with you. The end of 2025 does not ask you to run faster. It simply invites you to stand steady. Steady enough to feel that when you are healthier, brighter, and lighter from the inside, destiny does not need to be forced. It begins to turn on its own, and in the most ordinary moments, when you curl up under a warm blanket, when you eat a meal slowly, when you allow yourself to stop thinking for a while, a quiet preparation is taking place. Not loud, not dramatic, but deep and lasting. You do not need to do anything extraordinary to welcome 2026. You only need to step into the new year with a body that has been listened to, and an inner world that has been placed back where it belongs. When Libra is well on the inside, you do not have to search for destiny. Destiny finds you, as gently as the way you have just learned to treat yourself with more fairness than ever before. And then, after all the settling, the letting go, the moments when you chose yourself instead of continuing to endure, something very clear begins to emerge. Not as a grand promise, not as a sudden miracle, but as a gentle truth that has always been there, waiting for you to become still enough to recognize it. That you were not born to keep carrying everything. Not born to be everyone's support while forgetting that you, too, need somewhere to lean. Not born to be the most understanding person in the room, only to be the loneliest when the lights go out. The end of 2025 carries a quiet confirmation. No one says it out loud, but you feel it. As if an invisible hand rests softly on your shoulder and whispers, "Enough now." Enough of the years you spent enduring. Enough of the times you stayed silent to keep the peace. Enough of the roles you fulfilled completely, even when they were never fully acknowledged. The fairness Libra has always searched for in the outside world finally returns to where it belongs. Not to compensate, but to restore order. You may be surprised to realize that this fairness does not arrive through apologies, nor does it come because life suddenly becomes easy. It arrives as a feeling. The feeling that you no longer have to betray yourself. You no longer have to convince yourself that you are fine when you are not. You no longer have to stay in places that make you feel smaller just to avoid losing acceptance. And in that moment, a very simple, yet very powerful sentence finds its place inside you. I allow myself to live by my true values. No confirmation needed. No permission required. Only your own consent. When that sentence touches you, you realize it does not make you hard or selfish. Instead, it makes you softer, but with boundaries. You still know how to love. You still know how to listen. But you no longer trade your peace to hold on to what is no longer balanced. You begin choosing paths that make your heart feel lighter. Relationships where you are allowed to be yourself. A rhythm of life that does not demand you constantly exceed your real capacity. And from those choices, another door opens. Very slowly, very naturally. An old cycle does not close with a dramatic final line. It closes when you no longer need it. When you stop repeating old lessons in new forms. When you clearly see that you have grown beyond what once hurt you. 2026 does not appear as a distant promise. It begins right here, in this moment. As you stand still, take a deep breath and realize you are exactly where you belong. Not below, not above, just right. You step into the next stretch of your life not with loud excitement, but with a quiet trust. A trust that you do not need to suffer more to be worthy. A trust that fairness is not something you must beg for, but something that naturally appears when you live in alignment with your values. And carrying that trust, each small choice begins to lead you toward experiences that are truer, deeper, and more lasting. If there is one thing to hold on to as this journey comes to a close, it is this feeling. You no longer have to brace yourself to keep going. You do not need all the answers. You only need to know that you are ready to move forward without leaving yourself behind. The light you have been searching for is not far away. It lives right here, in this simple permission. The permission to live honestly. The permission to be treated fairly. The permission to open the door to a new year beginning, not through endurance, but through respect for your own heart.